Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you again in today's story. I would like to introduce to you an ancient story that science cannot explain. The Watchers, Anunnaki, heavenly beings who once ruled the earth. Now I invite you to listen to this story. Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into a story so vast, so mind-bending, it might just rewrite the operating system in your brain. Imagine standing on the very edge of known history, the air thrumming with unseen energies, the sky above a canvas of possibilities far beyond our everyday comprehension. You're about to peer into the abyss of time, where shadows of immense beings and whispers of forgotten technologies dance just beyond the firelight of our understanding. Honestly, if your reality settings are still on factory default, you probably won't survive this with your worldview entirely intact. But hey, what's a little existential recalibration among friends? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It genuinely helps the channel more than you might think. And while you're at it, I'd love to see where you're all tuning in from. Drop your city or country and the local time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see our little community spread across the globe, all sharing this quiet moment. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drift, not in your bed, but somewhere else, somewhere older. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and something else, something wild and untamed that no longer perfumes our sanitized world. Above you, the night sky isn't the muted, orange-tinged blanket you're used to. No, this is a fathomless, velvet ocean of stars, so dense and brilliant, it feels like you could reach out and scoop up a handful of diamond dust. The Milky Way isn't a faint smudge. It's a roaring river of light, a celestial highway, so bright it casts faint shadows on the landscape around you. You feel incredibly small, a tiny speck of consciousness in an immeasurable cosmos. And with that smallness comes a profound, almost dizzying sense of this is the sky your most ancient ancestors saw, night after night. No city glowed to steal its majesty, no phone screen to distract from its silent, overwhelming presence. Just you, the earth, and that immensity. What do you think gazing up at that spectacle? What questions ignite in your mind when the daily grind is stripped away, and it's just you and the universe having a little heart-to-heart? Perhaps you're wondering, as they must have wondered, what are those lights? Are they campfires of distant, colossal beings? Are they holes in a dark celestial tent, letting through a greater, unimaginable light? The silence of the night, broken only by the hoot of an owl or the distant rustle of something in the undergrowth, amplifies the questions. There are no quick Google searches here, no science documentaries to offer neat explanations. There's only observation, intuition, and the slow dawning realization that the world is far more complex and mysterious than it appears in the daylight. It's a bit like trying to understand your Wi-Fi by staring intently at the blinking router lights. You know something important is happening, but the how and why remain infuriatingly opaque. You trace the patterns in the stars, connecting the dots, just as humans have done for millennia. You see the hunter, the scorpion, the great celestial river. These aren't just idle pastimes. They are attempts to impose order on the chaos, to find meaning in the magnificent indifference of the cosmos. And in this act of pattern-seeking, you're participating in one of humanity's oldest intellectual traditions. In fact, some of the earliest known sophisticated astronomical observatories, like the Goseck Circle in Germany, date back to the Neolithic period, around 4900 BC. People were meticulously tracking solstices and celestial movements long before they were writing shopping lists, which, if you think about it, says a lot about our priorities as a species. We'd rather know our place in the universe than remember to pick up more. Well, whatever Neolithic people needed more of. Mammoth jerky, perhaps. The questions continue to bubble up. Where did all this come from? And more importantly, where did we come from? Are we an accident? A fleeting cosmic bloom? Or is there a design, a purpose, a creator, or perhaps a creators? These aren't just philosophical musings for a late-night podcast. These are the foundational queries that spark myths, religions, and the very beginnings of science. It's easy for us, in our information-saturated age, to forget the sheer raw power of these original mysteries. We have explanations, or at least theories, for so much. But imagine facing that star-drenched sky with nothing but your senses and your burgeoning consciousness. The desire for answers, for a narrative that makes sense of it all, must have been overwhelming. And it's in that fertile ground of awe and uncertainty that the first stories of creation, of gods, and of beings from beyond the confines of this earthly realm would have taken root. It's fascinating, isn't it, how many ancient cultures, separated by vast oceans and millennia, arrive at remarkably similar ideas about sky beings and their influence on earthly affairs. A quirky little tidbit for you. The ancient Egyptians believed the sky was the goddess Nut, her body arched protectively over the earth god Geb. Sometimes she was depicted covered in stars, literally embodying the night sky. Imagine trying to explain that concept at your next PDA meeting. Yes, Mrs. Davis, little Timmy's science project is a diorama of the star goddess swallowing the sun god Ra every evening. You'd probably get a few concerned looks. Yet, for them, it was a perfectly rational and poetic way to understand the daily cycle of sun and stars. The big question, the one that keeps scholars pleasantly employed and occasionally at each other's throats, is this. Historians still argue whether these widespread tales of powerful sky gods are purely metaphorical, representing natural forces and human psychological archetypes, or if they might contain, buried deep within their symbolic language, echoes of something else. Something more tangible, perhaps. Something that actually came from those star-dusted heavens. This is your place tonight, suspended between the mundane reality of your room and the echoing vastness of ancient wonder. You are here to listen to those primordial whispers, to explore the cosmic questions that have haunted humanity since we first looked up and realized we were not alone. Even if our only companions were the silent, glittering stars. And as we delve deeper, you might find those whispers growing louder, taking on forms both familiar and startlingly strange, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, our ancestors weren't just telling stories. Maybe they were trying to tell us something vital. And as you ponder those ancient, starlit questions, your perspective shifts, zooms in, like a cosmic drone descending through millennia. The vast, untamed wilderness coalesces into a specific landscape. You find yourself settling gently in a sun-baked river valley, a fertile crescent nestled between two mighty rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The air here is thick with heat, shimmering above the reed beds and the nascent fields of barley. This is Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, and you're witnessing the dawn of what many consider the world's first true civilization, Sumer. Feel the fine silty dust underfoot, a constant companion in this arid land. A gift from the annual floods that both nourished and threatened. You see people, their skin burnished by the relentless sun, moving with a purpose that speaks of organized society. They are building, farming, trading. It's a hive of activity, a stark contrast to the solitary wonder you felt moments ago under that vast, empty sky. Here, in these emerging city-states like Uruk, Uar, and Eridu, something revolutionary is happening. It's not just about growing crops or building mud brick houses, impressive though those feats are. No, the Sumerians, bless their innovative hearts, are wrestling with a challenge that every complex society eventually faces: how to keep track of things. How many sheep does Temple Storage Unit Alpha 7 have? Who owes whom how many bushels of grain? It's the age-old problem of too much information and not enough memory. Their solution? It wasn't a cloud-based spreadsheet, no. They invented writing. You watch as a scribe, perhaps a young apprentice with an ink smudge on his nose, or rather, a clay smudge, carefully presses a sharpened reed stylus into a damp clay tablet. Each wedge-shaped mark, cuneiform, is a tiny piece of data, a thought captured, an agreement solidified. It's painstaking work, a lot harder than dashing off a text message full of emojis, that's for sure. One wrong wedge and your meticulously recorded list of beer ingredients might accidentally summon a minor deity with a gluten intolerance. These clay tablets, thousands upon thousands of them, baked hard by the sun or intentionally in kilns, become the voice of this long-vanished people. And they didn't just write down their grocery lists or tax records, though, boy, did they record their taxes. One mainstream historical fact for you is that the Sumerians were pioneers in many areas beyond writing. They are often credited with inventions like the wheel, initially for pottery, then for chariots, talk about an upgrade, advanced irrigation, and even a system of mathematics based on the number 60, which is why we still have 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle. They were, to put it mildly, a rather clever bunch. They were also really into beer. Seriously. A quirky tidbit is that some of the oldest known written recipes are for Sumerian beer, and it was a dietary staple, consumed by everyone from kings to commoners. It was probably safer to drink than the water, and likely made those long, hot Mesopotamian afternoons a bit more mellow. They even had a goddess of brewing, Ninkasi. Imagine a divine being whose sole portfolio was ensuring the quality of your pint. Priorities, people. But as you sift through these ancient texts, through the hymns, the proverbs, the king lists, and the epic poems, something else emerges from the clay. Amidst the records of grain and the odes to beer, you find them, the Anunnaki. The word itself, whispered across 5 millennia, carries a strange resonance. The tablets speak of these beings as powerful gods, deities who came from the heavens. They are not vague, shadowy figures. They have names, distinct personalities, complex family trees, and shall we say, a rather dramatic set of interpersonal relationships that would give any modern soap opera a run for its money. There's Anu, the distant father figure, king of the gods, residing in the heavens. There are his sons, Enlil, the stern lord of the command, often associated with wind and storms, and Enki, the clever, crafty god of wisdom, magic, and water, often seen as a friend to humanity. These aren't just abstract concepts. The Sumerians built massive ziggurats, temple towers, reaching towards the sky, ostensibly as dwelling places or connection points for these divine beings when they descended to Earth. What's particularly intriguing, and what forms a cornerstone of many alternative historical narratives, is the apparent sophistication with which Sumerian civilization seems to spring into existence. One moment, metaphorically speaking, you have scattered Neolithic farming villages, and the next, boom, you have cities, complex social hierarchies, advanced mathematics, astronomy, and this incredibly detailed pantheon of sky gods. Mainstream archaeology traces a gradual development, of course, but for some, the perceived suddenness is a tantalizing clue. Could these Anunnaki, described as coming from the sky, have been more than just mythological figures? Could they have been the catalysts, the bringers of this sudden burst of knowledge? Scholars still debate the precise etymological origin and earliest meaning of the term Anunnaki itself, with some interpretations suggesting princely offspring or those of royal blood, while others connect it more directly to those who from heaven to earth came. The ambiguity is part of the allure, allowing for layers of interpretation. You see, the tablets don't just list these gods. They tell stories of their activities, their decisions, their interactions with humankind, and sometimes their rather significant interventions in earthly affairs. These aren't just bedtime stories scribbled by imaginative priests. They are foundational texts, considered by the Sumerians to be true accounts of their history and their relationship with the divine. It's like finding an ancient hard drive, and instead of just finding old operating system files, you discover a detailed log of divine beings walking among humans, making decisions that shape the very course of civilization. It's enough to make you pause and wonder, as you trace the ghost of a wedge-shaped character on a phantom tablet, just who or what were the Sumerians really writing about? And why do these particular stories, these specific names, seem to echo so powerfully, even now? The dust of Sumerian tablets still clings to your senses, the scent of baked clay and ancient ink lingering in the air. Now let's pull back the focus a little, not from the place, but from the concept. You're still in that fertile crescent, the cradle of civilization, but now you're trying to get a handle on this celestial soap opera, this divine council known as the Anunnaki. It's like trying to understand the org chart of a very old and incredibly powerful family business, where mergers and acquisitions often involve thunderbolts and the occasional city-leveling flood. At the very top, presiding over everything, sits Anu. Think of him as the chairman of the board, the ultimate sky father, usually depicted as somewhat remote, residing in his celestial abode. His name itself is often synonymous with heaven or sky. He's the big boss, the one whose approval is sought, but he's not always directly mucking about in earthly affairs. That he delegates. And who does he delegate to? Well, primarily to his two most prominent sons, Enlil and Enki. These two are the major players on Earth, and their contrasting personalities and portfolios drive much of the Anunnaki narrative. Enlil, whose name means something like Lord of the Command or Lord of the Air/Wind, is often portrayed as the enforcer, the stern disciplinarian. He's the one concerned with order, decrees, and making sure the rules are followed by gods and humans alike. If there's a divine smiting to be done, Enlil is often the one signing off on the paperwork. He's given dominion over the earth, essentially becoming its chief administrator. You can imagine him as the cosmic equivalent of that one manager who insists on triple-signed forms for every single papyrus requisition. He's not necessarily evil, but he's definitely got a temper and a low tolerance for shenanigans, especially from those pesky, noisy humans. Then you have Enki, and this is where things get really interesting, especially for us humans. Enki, also known as Ea in Akkadian and Babylonian mythology, is the god of wisdom, freshwater, specifically the Abzu, the watery abyss beneath the earth, magic, crafts, and creation. He's the clever one, the problem solver, the divine scientist and engineer. If Enlil is the stern CEO, Enki is the brilliant, slightly maverick head of R&D. He's often depicted as more sympathetic to humanity, even being credited in some myths with our creation, or at least our genetic upgrading, a point we'll definitely circle back to. He's the trickster, the one who finds loopholes in divine decrees, often to the benefit of mankind and to the immense frustration of his half-brother Enlil. Think Prometheus, but with a better understanding of irrigation and possibly a killer recipe for fish stew, given his association with water. Their rivalry is legendary, a celestial clash of wills that shapes destinies. But the Anunnaki family tree doesn't stop there. Oh no, it's a sprawling, complex web. There's Inanna, later known as Ishtar, a powerful and multifaceted goddess associated with love, beauty, sex, desire, fertility, war, justice, and political power. Talk about a diverse portfolio. She's no shrinking violet. She's ambitious, passionate, and not afraid to go after what she wants, whether it's a divine artifact or a new city to patronize. Her descent into the underworld is one of the most famous Sumerian myths, a powerful story of death and rebirth. Then there's Nana, the moon god, also known as Sin, which always gets a little chuckle from modern readers, but rest assured, it had no negative connotations back then. His city, Uar, was a major center of worship. Utu, also known as Shamash, was the sun god, the dispenser of justice, who saw everything that happened on Earth. Imagine him as the ultimate CCTV camera, but with a much better tan. And the list goes on. Ninhursag, the mother goddess, associated with fertility and the earth, often working alongside Enki in creation myths. Ninurta, the warrior god, Enlil's son, a divine hero who battles monsters and champions agriculture. Ereshkigal, Inanna's sister, the somewhat gloomy queen of the underworld. It's a whole pantheon, each with their own domains, temples, cults, and very human-like squabbles and alliances. One mainstream historical fact is that these Mesopotamian deities, under various names and with slightly altered attributes, were worshipped for thousands of years, their influence spreading to subsequent civilizations like the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. The core stories and divine personalities proved remarkably resilient and adaptable. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some of these divine beings had interesting modes of transport. While the texts are often poetic and symbolic, descriptions of gods traveling in skyboats or shining chariots have certainly fueled the imagination of ancient astronaut theorists. For example, the god Ashkur-Adad in Akkadian, the storm god, was often depicted standing on a bull or a lion dragon, wielding lightning bolts. Not exactly a stealthy entrance, but it definitely makes a statement. Honey, I'm home, and I brought the thunder. The relationships between these gods are a tangled mess of alliances, rivalries, marriages, and offspring. It's like a divine royal family where everyone is related in about 6 different ways, and they all have access to weapons of mass destruction. Historians still argue whether the shifting hierarchies and changing importance of certain deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon over millennia reflect actual political changes between their patron cities, or if they represent deeper theological evolutions and syncretism with the gods of other cultures. For instance, Marduk, the patron god of Babylon, rose to prominence as Babylon became the dominant power in Mesopotamia, and the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, famously elevates Marduk to the kingship of the gods. It's a bit like a corporate takeover, but with more cosmic battles and fewer golden parachutes. So you have this roster of powerful, often very human-acting sky gods. They love, they hate, they plot, they create, they destroy. They hold council meetings, they issue decrees, and they seem to spend an inordinate amount of time managing, or mismanaging, the affairs of Earth and its fledgling human population. The Sumerians didn't just see them as abstract forces. They saw them as real entities who directly interacted with their world. And as you get to know this cast of characters, you can't help but wonder, if these are the gods, what exactly was their game plan? And why were they so interested in this little blue-green planet and its rather noisy inhabitants? The answers, or at least the purported answers, are just as fascinating as the gods themselves. Having acquainted yourself with the key players in this celestial drama, the Anunnaki Council with all their divine portfolios and family feuds, your gaze naturally turns upwards, toward the heavens they supposedly came from. The Sumerian text, those patient clay witnesses, don't just name these gods, they associate them with specific celestial bodies. Inanna, for example, was linked with Venus, Nana with the moon, U2 with the sun. This is standard ancient world practice, gods and planets often going hand in hand. But there's one celestial body, or rather, one proposed celestial body, central to the more controversial interpretations of the Anunnaki story, particularly as championed by authors like Zacharias Sitchin, that we need to talk about, Nibiru. According to these interpretations, Nibiru isn't just another planet in our solar system. It's the Anunnaki's homeworld. And it's not playing by the usual orbital rules. Imagine our solar system as you know it, the sun at the center, the familiar planets dutifully tracing their nearly circular paths. Now picture another planet, a massive one, perhaps several times the size of Earth, on a hugely elongated, elliptical orbit. This isn't a gentle, predictable loop. This is an epic, sweeping journey that takes it far out into the cold, dark reaches of space, well beyond Pluto, before it swings back inwards, crossing through the inner solar system, passing between Mars and Jupiter. The proposed orbital period for Nibiru? Roughly 3,600 Earth years. That means for the vast majority of its year, it's an invisible wanderer in the deep freeze of interstellar space. But every 3,600 years, it makes its dramatic re-entrance a celestial guest star, or perhaps a cosmic disruptor. This, according to the theory, is where the Anunnaki hail from. Life on Nibiru would be different. Imagine a world that spends thousands of years in near total darkness and extreme cold, followed by a relatively brief, intense period closer to a sun. The beings evolving there would need to be incredibly resilient, perhaps with very long lifespans to cope with such a lengthy orbital cycle. This is often used to explain the seemingly immense lifespans attributed to the Anunnaki in the myths. They weren't just living for centuries, they were living for Shar, the Sumerian word for 3,600, which Sitchin equated with one Iberuan year. It's a neat, if highly speculative, way to tie it all together. If your home planet only gets decent sunshine once every few millennia, you probably want to make the most of those summer vacations. Maybe that's why they were so keen on Earth projects, a bit of cosmic timeshare. The proponents of Nibiru's existence point to Sumerian cylinder seals and texts that they believe depict our solar system with an extra planet. One famous example is a seal known as VA-243, which shows a central star surrounded by 11 globes of varying sizes. If you count the sun, moon, which the ancients often considered a planetary body, and the known planets up to Pluto, which was known when Sitchin was writing, though its planetary status is now debated, bless its icy heart, you get 10. The 11th, larger body, is identified as Nibiru. Of course, mainstream historical fact states that Sumerian cosmology, while advanced for its time, typically recognized only 5 planets visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, along with the Sun and Moon. Their understanding of the solar system was geocentric and not in line with modern heliocentric models. The idea of a rogue planet, a planet X, has a certain allure. It's appeared in various forms throughout astronomical history, often invoked to explain perceived anomalies in the orbits of known planets. A quirky tidbit is that Percival Lowell, the astronomer famous for popularizing the idea of canals on Mars, spent years searching for a planet X beyond Neptune, believing it was perturbing the orbits of Uranus and Neptune. His calculations eventually led to the discovery of Pluto, although Pluto turned out to be too small to account for the discrepancies Lowell was trying to explain. The search for a more massive Planet X, or Planet 9 as it's sometimes called today, continues, with some astronomers finding indirect evidence in the clustering of distant Kuiper belt objects. However, this modern scientific search is for a planet within our solar system, not necessarily one on a 3,600-year Earth-crossing orbit from outside. The narrative around Nibiru gets even more dramatic when its past interactions with our solar system are considered. According to Sitchin's reading of the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, Nibiru, or Marduk, as the planet is identified with the god in this context, didn't just swing by for a friendly visit. It collided, catastrophically, with a primordial planet named Tiamat, which supposedly existed between Mars and Jupiter. This cosmic fender-bender allegedly shattered Tiamat. One half became the asteroid belt, that rocky junkyard of our solar system. The other half, struck again by one of Nibiru's moons, was shunted into a new orbit, mingled with water from Nibiru's entourage, and became Earth. Our moon, in this scenario, is one of Tiamat's original satellites, or a chunk of Tiamat itself, captured in the aftermath. It's a grand, violent, and undeniably cinematic origin story. Way more exciting than a bunch of dust slowly clumped together over billions of years. Now, it's crucial to state that the scientific community overwhelmingly rejects the existence of Nibiru as described in these theories. There is no accepted astronomical evidence for a planet with such an orbit, and its gravitational effects on the known planets will be significant and detectable if it were real. Astronomers and physicists still debate the precise formation dynamics of our solar system and the exact origins of the asteroid belt and the moon, but the Nibiru collision hypothesis is not considered a scientifically viable explanation. For many, it's a misinterpretation of mythological texts, taking poetic allegory and ancient cosmology far too literally. The gods battling primordial chaos monsters is a common mythological trope, not necessarily a coded account of planetary mechanics. And yet, the idea of Nibiru persists, a powerful symbol in the ancient astronaut narrative. It provides a home for the Anunnaki, a reason for their advanced nature, and a ticking clock for their periodic returns. Whether you see it as a real celestial body, a metaphor, or a fascinating piece of modern myth-making built on ancient foundations, Nibiru's epic, controversial journey through the cosmos is an essential part of understanding why these sky gods might have set their sights on our humble blue planet. It sets the stage for their alleged mission, a mission driven by a desperate need, a cosmic imperative that would lead them directly to Earth's most precious, glittering resource. So you have these advanced beings, the Anunnaki, hailing from this rather dramatically orbiting planet Nibiru. Their world, according to the narrative spun from Zacharias Sitchin's interpretations of Sumerian texts, faces a serious, potentially existential crisis. The problem? Their atmosphere. Apparently, Nibiru's long, cold journey far from any sun was causing its atmosphere to gradually dissipate, to erode into space. Without a stable atmosphere, life on Nibiru, even for super-advanced Anunnaki, would become untenable. They needed a solution, a planetary-scale atmospheric repair job. And the key ingredient for this cosmic fix, the element they believed could save their world, was gold. Not for its monetary value, not for making shiny trinkets or ostentatious celestial bling, though they weren't averse to a bit of bling, if ancient depictions are anything to go by. No, they needed gold for a very specific, highly technological purpose. The theory posits that finely powdered gold, suspended in Nibiru's upper atmosphere, could act as a reflective shield, deflecting solar radiation during its closer passes to the sun and, more importantly, helping to retain heat and prevent further atmospheric loss during its long, cold stretches in deep space. Think of it as a planet-sized emergency blanket made of gold dust. A rather expensive solution, but if your entire world is at stake, you probably don't skimp on the materials. So the Anunnaki, being the proactive, problem-solving species they were, or at least their ruling class was, initiated a massive interstellar mining operation. They scanned the solar system, looking for planets rich in this vital, life-saving element. And where did their celestial survey ships, their divine dowsing rods, lead them? You guessed it, Earth. Our little blue-green marble, it turns out, was a cosmic gold mine. According to this storyline, the first Anunnaki expeditions to Earth, led by Enki, the brilliant scientist god, arrived hundreds of thousands of years ago, long before the rise of Sumerian civilization as we know it. Their initial landing site was supposedly in the region of the Persian Gulf, specifically Eridu, which the Sumerians themselves considered their oldest city, the home of Enki. Their mission was singular: extract vast quantities of gold and ship it back to Nibiru. You can almost picture the cosmic project management meetings. All right, team, quarterly gold quotas are down. We need to increase output. Enlil is not going to be happy with these numbers during the next orbital pass. It sounds almost mundane, like an interstellar version of a terrestrial mining company, albeit with much cooler spacecraft and presumably better dental plans. The early mining efforts were apparently quite challenging. The Anunnaki who were tasked with the actual labor, the rank-and-file Igigi, a group of lesser deities, sometimes described as working for the Anunnaki elite or even as the Anunnaki astronauts who remain in orbit, reportedly toiled for millennia in the gold mines, primarily in southern Africa. Ancient gold mines in this region, some dating back tens of thousands of years according to conventional archaeology, are often cited as evidence for this Anunnaki operation. A mainstream historical fact is that southern Africa does indeed have some of the world's oldest known mining sites, such as the Lion Cavern in Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, which shows evidence of hematite mining dating back at least 43,000 years. While archaeologists attribute this mining to early humans for pigments, the sheer antiquity of these sites is certainly intriguing. The conditions in these mines were harsh, the labor relentless. Imagine being a highly advanced being, used to the comforts of Nibiru, even with its atmospheric issues, suddenly finding yourself doing back-breaking manual labor on a primitive planet. It's like a Silicon Valley CEO being forced to dig ditches with a rusty shovel. Eventually, the Igigi had enough. They mutinied. They refused to continue the arduous work, complaining to Enlil, the stern commander. This celestial labor dispute, this divine strike action, presented a major crisis for the Anunnaki leadership. The gold shipments were critical, Nibiru's atmosphere wasn't going to fix itself, and now their workforce was downing tools. What to do? This is where Enki, the ever-resourceful god of wisdom and science, steps in with a truly audacious proposal, a plan that would not only solve the labor shortage but would also, according to this theory, change the destiny of Earth forever. A quirky tidbit related to ancient mining and strange priorities. The ancient Romans were obsessed with a pigment called Tyrian purple, extracted from sea snails. It was incredibly labor-intensive to produce thousands of snails for a tiny amount of dye, making it worth more than its weight in gold. It became a symbol of imperial power. It just goes to show, what one culture deems incredibly precious and worth immense effort, another might just see as a snail. The Anunnaki, in this narrative, were all about the gold, not for color, but for survival. The debate here, of course, is enormous. Archaeologists and geologists still argue about the exact processes and timelines for the formation of Earth's gold deposits, but the idea of extraterrestrial beings mining it to save their home planet is firmly in the realm of fringe theory. Mainstream science explains gold's presence through natural geological processes, such as its arrival via meteorite impacts during Earth's formation and its concentration in veins by hydrothermal activity. There's no scientific evidence to suggest it was mined on a planetary scale by aliens for atmospheric repair. The narrative relies entirely on interpreting ancient myths and artifacts through a very specific technological lens. Yet, the story is compelling. It provides a motive, a reason for these powerful sky gods to be here, mucking about on Earth. It paints them not just as whimsical deities playing with mortals, but as desperate beings on a mission of cosmic importance. Their quest for gold, this glittering, incorruptible metal, becomes the driving force behind their presence, a catalyst for their prolonged stay, and the reason they eventually turn their attention to the most adaptable, if somewhat primitive, life form already present on the planet, early hominids. Because if your divine workforce goes on strike, and you still need those cosmic gold bricks, what's the next logical step? You create a new workforce, one that's perhaps a little more compliant. Or so the story goes. The quest for gold, it seems, was about to lead to an even more audacious project, the fashioning of humankind. The Anunnaki are in a bind. Their atmospheric shield project on Nibiru is stalling. The all-important gold shipments are threatened because the Ijiji, their divine workforce, have thrown down their cosmic shovels and are essentially staging a picket line around the gold mines. You can almost hear Enlil fuming, his celestial brow furrowed with frustration. Mutiny? On my watch? Unacceptable. But righteous anger doesn't dig gold. They need a new labor source, and they need it fast. This is the critical juncture where Enki, the ever-ingenious god of science and wisdom, steps forward with a plan so bold, so ethically questionable, it makes your average corporate restructuring look like a teddy bear's picnic. His proposal: let's engineer a primitive worker, a Lulu Amalu, a mixed worker, by taking the existing hominids already roaming the plains of Africa and upgrading them. Think about it from their perspective. If you subscribe to this narrative, they're already on Earth, they have advanced genetic knowledge, they are, after all, capable of interstellar travel and planetary atmospheric engineering, so a bit of biological tinkering should be within their wheelhouse. And there's a native species that, while not exactly up to the task of complex mining operations, has potential. These early hominids, perhaps Homo erectus or a similar species, are already bipedal, reasonably intelligent and adaptable. They just need a little genetic nudge. A bit of Anunnaki DNA spliced in, perhaps? A carefully targeted enhancement of their cognitive abilities, their physical dexterity, their capacity to understand instructions and perform complex tasks. The goal wasn't to create an equal, not by a long shot. The goal was to create a servant race, beings intelligent enough to work the mines and serve the Anunnaki, but not so advanced as to pose a threat or demand equal rights. It's a chillingly utilitarian concept. Mankind, created not in a divine image of love, but as a biological tool. The Sumerian texts, particularly the Atrahasis epic, describe this creation process, albeit in mythological language. They speak of the gods complaining about their toil, the mutiny of the Ijiji, and then Enki, along with the mother goddess Ninhursag, also called Ninti or Mami, undertaking the task of shaping man. The texts mention mixing the clay of the earth with the flesh and blood of a sacrificed god, a god named Geshtui, described as having intelligence. This divine blood, this essence, was infused into the new beings. It's not hard to see how ancient astronaut theorists interpret clay as the earthly genetic material of hominids and the blood of a god as the introduction of Anunnaki DNA. The process is even described as taking place in a special creative chamber, almost like a laboratory, with birth goddesses assisting. There are descriptions of trial and error, of imperfect beings created before the desired model, Adamu and Tiamat, not to be confused with the primordial planet Tiamat, was successfully fashioned. This is where the narrative veers sharply from traditional religious accounts of creation and also from mainstream evolutionary science. A mainstream historical fact is that the scientific consensus, based on extensive fossil and genetic evidence, shows that Homo sapiens evolved in Africa over hundreds of thousands of years through natural selection and other evolutionary mechanisms. There's no accepted scientific evidence for extraterrestrial genetic intervention in human evolution. The missing link, often cited by proponents of alien intervention, is seen by scientists not as a gap, but as a rich and increasingly well-understood fossil record of transitional hominid species. However, the idea of humanity as an engineered species is a cornerstone of the Anunnaki hypothesis. It seeks to explain certain human peculiarities, our relatively rapid brain development, our seemingly unique level of self-awareness, even our susceptibility to certain genetic disorders, perhaps unfortunate side effects of the genetic tinkering. It also attempts to account for the Sumerians' own accounts of being created by their gods to serve them. They weren't being metaphorical, the theory suggests. They were recording a literal truth passed down through oral tradition. If your creators told you, "We made you to dig our stuff," you'd probably write that down. Maybe after you finished your shift in the cosmic gold mine, of course. A quirky tidbit in this context is the concept of junk DNA. For a long time, vast stretches of our DNA that didn't code for proteins were dismissed as junk. More recent research shows that much of this non-coding DNA plays crucial roles in gene regulation and other functions. However, ancient astronaut theorists have sometimes speculated that this junk DNA might contain dormant Anunnaki genetic sequences, or perhaps even encrypted information left by our creators. It's a fascinating, if highly speculative idea, like finding a hidden software patch in our own biological operating system. Press Ctrl-Alt-Delete to activate your latent Anunnaki psychic powers, or maybe just to get a good night's sleep. The ethical implications of this creation story are profound. If humans were indeed engineered as a slave race, it casts a rather dark shadow over our origins and our relationship with these gods. It raises questions about free will, purpose, and exploitation on a cosmic scale. Scholars still debate whether the Sumerian creation myths, like the Enuma Elish and Atrahasis, should be interpreted as straightforward historical or proto-scientific accounts, or as complex theological and political allegories addressing themes of order versus chaos, divine power, and the human condition. For instance, the theme of gods needing to be served by humans could simply be a way to legitimize the temple economy and the priestly class who mediated between the human and divine realms. But if you follow the thread of the Anunnaki narrative, this act of creation, this blending of heaven and earth in our very genes, is the pivotal moment. It's why we are who we are, according to this school of thought. We are the children of earth, yes, but also the genetically modified descendants of beings from another world. This new being, Adamu, the earthy one, or man, was then put to work. The gold mines in Africa, and perhaps elsewhere, now had a new, more pliable workforce. The Anunnaki had their laborers, and Nibiru, presumably, started getting its gold shipments again. But as with any grand experiment, especially one involving sentient beings, things rarely go exactly according to plan. These new humans, infused with a spark of divine intelligence, were perhaps a little too successful, a little too a human. And that, as you can imagine, would lead to a whole new set of complications for their celestial masters, so the newly fashioned humans, the Lulu Amalu, are now on the scene. They're toiling away in the gold mines, perhaps in the fertile fields of Mesopotamia, serving the Anunnaki, their sky god creators. You can imagine it's a bit of a culture shock for these early humans, suddenly thrust into a world managed by beings of immense power and advanced technology. One minute you're figuring out which end of a sharpened stick is best for fending off a grumpy aurochs. The next you're being handed a genetically engineered shovel and told to meet your daily gold quota for a planet you've never heard of. It must have been, to put it mildly, an adjustment. The Sumerian texts and the narratives built upon them depict a period where humans and gods lived in relatively close proximity, or at least humans lived under the direct supervision and rule of these Anunnaki. What was life like living with these sky gods? The texts don't paint a picture of idyllic harmony, not always. The gods, as we've established, had their own agendas, their own squabbles, and humans were often caught in the middle or directly impacted by divine whims and decrees. Imagine having a landlord who can summon thunderstorms or cause earthquakes if you're late with the rent, the rent, in this case being offerings, labor, and unwavering obedience. The Anunnaki established cities, centers of command and control, places like Eridu, Nippur, Shurapak. These weren't just human settlements. They were Anunnaki outposts, with temples that were quite literally considered the dwelling places of the gods when they were on Earth. Humans served the gods in these temples, providing food, drink. Remember Ninkasi, the goddess of beer? She needed her ingredients and performing various rituals. It was a system of divine kingship where human rulers were appointed as intermediaries, a sort of middle management, tasked with ensuring the human population fulfilled its obligations to the Anunnaki. The texts describe the Anunnaki teaching humans various arts of civilization, agriculture, animal husbandry, irrigation techniques, crucial in Mesopotamia, building and social organization. Enki, in particular, is often credited as a benevolent teacher, sharing knowledge with his new creations. This, according to the ancient astronaut theory, explains the sudden appearance of sophisticated knowledge in Sumer. It wasn't developed slowly over millennia. It was a direct download from an advanced extraterrestrial civilization. Why reinvent the wheel when your cosmic overlords can just give you the blueprints? One mainstream historical fact is that early Sumerian society was remarkably organized. They had specialized labor, a priestly class, scribes, builders, farmers, and a clear social hierarchy. Their cities were planned, with complex temple precincts, granaries, and workshops. Whether this organization was entirely self-developed or influenced by an external, more advanced group is, of course, the crux of the debate. Now, here's where it gets a bit R-rated, or at least PG-13, in the ancient texts. Remember how the Anunnaki engineered humans to be workers? Well, it seems some of the Anunnaki, particularly the younger males stationed on Earth, found the daughters of men rather attractive. The book of Genesis in the Old Testament, in chapter 6, famously mentions the sons of God, B'nai Elohim, seeing the daughters of men, Banahadim, that they were fair, and taking them as wives. This passage has long puzzled theologians and scholars. Who were these sons of God? In the context of the Anunnaki narrative, they were Anunnaki males, interbreeding with human females. This created a new generation of beings, sometimes referred to as demigods or heroes of old, men of renown, the Nephilim, a term often translated as giants, or those who cause others to fall. This intermingling was apparently not part of the original plan, and it certainly didn't please all the Anunnaki leadership, particularly the stern Enlil. He was already annoyed by humans. They were becoming too numerous, too noisy. One text complains that the clamor of humanity was preventing Enlil from sleeping. It's a bit like having incredibly loud neighbors who also happen to be a species you reluctantly created to mine gold for you. And now they're interbreeding with your junior staff? Unacceptable. This unauthorized fraternization, this blurring of the lines between God and mortal, master and servant, was seen as a major transgression by some factions of the Anunnaki. It was polluting the divine bloodline, perhaps, or maybe just creating a class of beings who didn't quite fit into the established order. A quirky tidbit is that many ancient mythologies around the world feature stories of gods interbreeding with humans, resulting in heroes with extraordinary abilities. Think Hercules, son of Zeus and the mortal Alcmene. It's a surprisingly common mythological trope, this divine human hanky-panky. This period of cohabitation and interaction, however, was not to last. The tensions were building. The human population was growing, their noise was increasing, and this unauthorized interbreeding was causing serious concern among the Anunnaki Council. Scholars still debate whether the Sons of God passage in Genesis and similar accounts in other ancient Near Eastern texts refer to fallen angels, powerful human rulers who were deified, or Sethites, descendants of Seth, intermarrying with Cainites, descendants of Cain, or if they preserve a much older mythological tradition of divine beings interacting with humanity. For proponents of the Anunnaki theory, the interpretation is clear. These were extraterrestrials and their hybrid offspring. The Anunnaki, it seems, were facing another crisis. Their engineered workforce was becoming a bit too successful, a bit too independent, and a bit too intermingled. Enlil, in particular, was looking for a final solution to the human problem. He felt the whole experiment had gotten out of hand. The creation of humanity, once a clever fix for a labor shortage, was now seen, at least by him, as a mistake that needed to be rectified. And the method he favored for this rectification? Something drastic. Something that would wipe the slate clean. Something on a planetary scale. The stage was being set for a cataclysm, a great deluge that would not only test the resilience of humanity, but also reveal the deep divisions within the Anunnaki Council itself. Living with the sky gods was a complex, often perilous existence, and it was about to become a whole lot more dangerous. The situation on Earth has reached a boiling point, at least from Enlil's perspective. Humanity, his father Anu's grand labor experiment, or rather, Enki's bioengineered solution that Anu signed off on, has become, in Enlil's eyes, a noisy, unruly, and excessively procreative problem. Remember the complaints about humans being too loud and keeping him awake? It sounds almost comical, like a grumpy old man yelling at kids to get off his cosmic lawn. But for Enlil, it was a serious breach of the intended order. Add to this the unauthorized intermingling, the Anunnaki sons of God, taking human wives and fathering hybrid offspring, and Enlil's patience is utterly depleted. He sees this as a contamination, a perversion of the original plan. His solution? A global catastrophe, a great flood to wipe the slate clean, to eradicate humanity and presumably their hybrid children from the face of the earth. The decision to bring about a deluge wasn't unanimous within the Anunnaki Council. This is a crucial point in the narrative. Enki, the very god who, alongside Ninhursag, had been instrumental in humanity's creation, was vehemently opposed to their complete destruction. He had a soft spot for his creations, perhaps a sense of responsibility, or maybe he just didn't like his half-brother Enlil telling him his projects were failures. The Sumerian and Babylonian flood myths, most notably the Epic of Gilgamesh, which features Utnapishtim as the flood hero, and the Atrahasis epic, provide detailed accounts of these divine deliberations. The gods, led by Enlil, swear an oath to keep the plan for the flood secret for humankind. They want a total annihilation. No survivors. But Enki, the clever trickster, the master of loopholes, finds a way around his oath. He doesn't speak directly to his favorite human, a wise and righteous man named Utnapishtim in the Gilgamesh epic, or Atrahasis in the epic bearing his name, because that would violate the oath. Instead, he speaks to the reed wall of Utnapishtim's hut. Reed hut, wall wall. Reed hut, hearken. Wall, reflect, he whispers, a clever bit of divine plausible deniability. Oh, I wasn't talking to him. I was just having a chat with the architectural features. He instructs Utnapishtim/Atrahasis to dismantle his house, build a massive boat, an ark, and load it with his family, skilled craftsmen, animals, and the seed of all living things. He gives him precise instructions for the boat's dimensions and construction, emphasizing that it must be sealed with bitumen to make it watertight. Sound familiar? The parallels to the story of Noah in the Hebrew Bible are undeniable and striking. One mainstream historical fact is that flood myths are incredibly common across diverse cultures worldwide, many of which had no direct contact with Mesopotamia. From the Greek story of Deucalion and Pyrrha to the Hindu legend of Manu, to tales from indigenous cultures in the Americas and Australia, the motif of a world-destroying flood and a few chosen survivors on a boat is remarkably persistent. This has led to various theories, including the possibility of these myths preserving memories of actual large-scale regional floods, like the flooding of the Black Sea Basin around 5600 BCE, or more speculatively, a single global cataclysm. As the designated day arrives, the Anunnaki unleash the deluge. The texts describe it with terrifying power: storms, rains, the breaching of dams, the sea rising. Even the gods themselves are frightened by the destructive forces they've set in motion. The tablet from the Epic of Gilgamesh reads, "The gods were frightened by the deluge, and shrinking back, they ascended to the heaven of Anu." The gods cowered like dogs, crouching against the outer wall. It's a vivid image. These powerful sky beings, who initiated the catastrophe, are now cowering in fear of its uncontrollable might. It suggests that perhaps even they underestimated the devastation they would cause, or maybe some of them, apart from Enlil, were having second thoughts. A quirky tidbit: in some versions of the flood story, the goddess Ishtar Inanna weeps bitterly for the destruction of her human creations, crying out, "How could I command evil in the assembly of the gods? How could I command a battle to destroy my people?" It shows a division among the gods, a sense of regret, at least from some, which adds a layer of complexity to their characters. They aren't monolithic in their desires. The flood rages for 6 days and 7 nights in the Gilgamesh account, covering the entire earth, wiping out all life that wasn't on the ark. When the waters finally begin to subside, Utnapishtim's boat comes to rest on a mountaintop, Mount Nazur. He sends out a dove, then a swallow, then a raven to see if the land is dry. When the raven doesn't return, he knows it's safe to emerge. He makes an offering to the gods, and the scent of the roasting meat attracts them like flies, as the epic rather unflatteringly puts it. They're hungry after all that cosmic drama. Enlil, however, is furious when he discovers that humans have survived. He feels betrayed. No man was to survive the destruction, he rages. But Enki steps forward and confronts him, arguing for humanity's right to exist, perhaps pointing out their usefulness, or maybe even appealing to some nascent divine compassion. Scholars still debate the primary theological message of the Mesopotamian flood stories. Was it about divine wrath against human sinfulness, a common interpretation of the Noah story, a commentary on the precariousness of human existence in a world governed by capricious gods, or an exploration of themes like divine justice, mercy, and the limits of godly power? The texts themselves are open to multiple readings. Ultimately, in the Mesopotamian versions, a compromise is reached. Humanity is allowed to continue, but with certain limitations imposed, perhaps shorter lifespans, mortality, disease, and other hardships to keep their numbers and their noise in check. Utnapishtim and his wife, uniquely, are granted immortality and sent to live far away, at the mouth of the rivers. The Anunnaki, it seems, decided that while humanity was a problematic creation, they were perhaps also a necessary one. The wrath had been expressed, the world had been cleansed, and now the task of rebuilding, of starting civilization anew, lay ahead. And the Anunnaki, their internal conflicts perhaps temporarily resolved, would once again play a pivotal role in guiding what was left of mankind. The waters have receded. Utnapishtim, or Atrahasis, depending on which epic you're following, has made his offering, and the Anunnaki, despite Enlil's initial fury, have grudgingly accepted humanity's survival. You can imagine this scene. A world scoured clean, silent and desolate, the stench of mud and decay hanging heavy in the air. The survivors on the ark, a tiny remnant of a once teeming population, step out onto this barren, waterlogged landscape. It's a daunting prospect. Everything is gone: their homes, their cities, their cultivated fields. It's a planetary reset button, pressed with devastating force. But humanity, as it turns out, is a remarkably resilient weed, always finding a way to spring back. And in this narrative, they weren't left entirely to their own devices. The Anunnaki, having decided not to completely scrap their human project, now had a vested interest in getting civilization back up and running. After all, who was going to mine the gold, till the fields, and provide the offerings if humanity was reduced to a handful of traumatized hunter-gatherers? So begins the period of rebuilding, a second genesis for humankind, guided once again by their celestial overlords. The Sumerian king lists, those fascinating and often perplexing documents that record successions of rulers over vast, almost mythical spans of time, often mention a sharp break in continuity with the flood. They'll list kings who ruled for incredibly long periods before the flood swept over, and then a new series of kings who ruled after the flood. This signals a new beginning, a new phase in the relationship between gods and mortals. The Anunnaki, according to proponents of this theory, re-established centers of civilization, perhaps in new locations or by rebuilding old ones. They re-imparted knowledge, agriculture, animal husbandry, law, social order, essentially kickstarting society version 2.0. It's like your computer crashing and losing all your data, but then the IT guy, Enki, probably shows up with a recovery disk and helps you reinstall the essential programs. Enki, ever the friend to humanity, or at least the one who saw their continued utility, is often portrayed as a key figure in this post-Diluvian reconstruction. He helps drain the land, reestablishes fertile areas, and teaches humanity anew the skills needed to survive and thrive. The Anunnaki, it said, assigned different regions of the world to different gods, or perhaps different groups of humans under their patronage, laying the foundations for the distinct cultures and civilizations that would emerge in the following millennia. This distribution of lands and knowledge could be seen as an attempt to prevent the kind of over-centralization and overpopulation that, in Enlil's view, had led to the noise problem before the flood. Spread them out, give them different projects, keep them busy. One mainstream historical fact is that after a period of apparent disruption and population decline in the ancient Near East, which some archaeologists link to climatic changes and regional flooding events, though not necessarily a single global deluge, we do see the reemergence and spread of settled agricultural communities, the growth of new urban centers, and the development of distinct regional cultures. The archaeological record shows a complex pattern of collapse and regeneration. The Anunnaki, in this renewed world, perhaps took a slightly more hands-off approach, or at least a more structured one. Instead of direct, day-to-day micromanagement, they might have relied more heavily on human intermediaries, the kings and priests who claimed divine authority and acted as conduits for the god's will. The concept of kingship, descending from heaven, is a recurring theme in Sumerian texts. These early post-flood rulers were seen as divinely appointed shepherds of their people, tasked with maintaining order, ensuring prosperity, and crucially, keeping the gods happy through proper worship and tribute. This would have been a more sustainable model for the Anunnaki, less labor-intensive for them, while still ensuring their needs, gold, offerings, a compliant populace, were met. It's the difference between being a helicopter parent and sending your kid to a well-managed boarding school run by hand-picked staff. Both aim for control, but one is far less effort. A quirky tidbit in the context of rebuilding is the Mesopotamian concept of the Apkallu. These were 7 semi-divine sages, sometimes described as fish-like beings or mermen, shades of Enki's association with water, who were said to have emerged from the Persian Gulf in primordial times, before the flood, to teach humanity the arts of civilization. After the flood, new sages appeared, or perhaps the old ones were retasked, to help restore knowledge. These figures, like Adapa, who famously lost his chance at immortality by refusing the food and water of life offered by Anu, on Enki's mischievous advice, bridged the gap between gods and humans, acting as culture bearers and teachers. The idea of wise beings, often associated with water, bringing knowledge to early humans is another surprisingly widespread mythological motif. Remember Oannes from Babylonian myth, who was said to come out of the Erythraean Sea each day to instruct mankind. The rebuilding effort wasn't just about practical skills. It was also about reestablishing the cosmic order, the right relationship between humanity and the gods. New temples were built, new laws promulgated. Archaeologists and historians still debate the extent to which later Mesopotamian societal structures and religious practices were direct continuations of pre-flood traditions, if such a distinct pre-flood era can even be archaeologically defined beyond myth, versus new developments shaped by the specific environmental and social conditions of the post-Diluvian world. The trauma of the flood, whether a literal global event or a powerful regional memory amplified by myth, would have undoubtedly left a deep psychological scar, influencing religious beliefs and social customs for generations. There would be a profound sense of humility, a recognition of humanity's fragility in the face of divine power, and perhaps a renewed determination to avoid whatever transgressions had brought about such devastation. So the shattered world begins to mend. Fields are tilled, cities rise again from the mud, and humanity, under the watchful and perhaps still somewhat wary eyes of the Anunnaki, sets about the task of rebuilding not just their physical world, but their very civilization. The Anunnaki, having used a cataclysm to edit their human experiment, now seemed committed to its revised edition. But as humanity spread and diversified, as new empires rose and fell, Did the influence of these sky gods remain confined to Mesopotamia? Or did their tutelage, their genetic legacy, and perhaps even their physical presence leave echoes in other burgeoning civilizations across the globe? The Fertile Crescent was just the beginning. The seeds of this strange shared history were about to be carried on the winds and on the waters to distant lands. The mud of the Mesopotamian floodplains is slowly drying on your metaphorical boots, and the sounds of hammers and chisels rebuilding Sumerian cities fade into a gentle hum. Now let your awareness drift southwest, following the fertile arc of land, across arid deserts, until you reach another mighty river, a ribbon of life snaking through a sun-scorched landscape, the Nile. Here, another colossal ancient civilization arose, seemingly in parallel with Mesopotamia, yet with its own distinct character, its own pantheon of gods, and its own monumental mysteries, ancient Egypt. As you settle by the banks of this life-giving river, watching the feluccas with their tall, triangular sails glide by, you can't help but wonder if the Anunnaki, those far-traveling sky gods, also left their mark here. Do the echoes of Nibiru and the genetic tinkering of Enki resonate under the watchful eyes of Ra and Osiris? The Egyptian pantheon is, if anything, even more iconic and visually striking than the Sumerian one. You have Ra, a powerful sun god, often depicted with a falcon's head crowned by a sun disk. Osiris, the god of the afterlife, the underworld and rebirth, famously murdered by his jealous brother Set and resurrected by his devoted wife Isis. Isis herself, a master of magic, a divine mother figure. Horus, their son, the falcon-headed god of the sky and kingship, who avenged his father. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification and the dead, guiding souls through the afterlife. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing, and knowledge, the divine scribe, a clear parallel to Sumer's Enki/Ea in terms of portfolio, though not necessarily in direct lineage within the Anunnaki theory. These gods were deeply woven into the fabric of Egyptian life, from the grandest state rituals to the humblest personal amulets. Proponents of the ancient astronaut theory often point to several aspects of Egyptian civilization as potential evidence of Anunnaki, or at least advanced extraterrestrial influence. Firstly, there's the perceived suddenness and sophistication of early Egyptian culture, particularly during the early dynastic period and the Old Kingdom, when the Great Pyramids of Giza were built. One mainstream historical fact is that the Great Pyramid of Giza, built for the pharaoh Khufu around 2580 to 2560 BC, is an astonishing feat of engineering. It consists of an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing tens of tons, fitted together with incredible precision. For centuries, it was the tallest man-made structure on Earth. Mainstream Egyptology explains its construction through meticulous planning, a vast, well-organized workforce of skilled Egyptian laborers and ingenious, if still debated, construction techniques involving ramps and levers. No aliens required, just a whole lot of human ingenuity, backbreaking work, and a society capable of mobilizing immense resources. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we might have joked about earlier? They probably needed something even stronger under that Egyptian sun while quarrying those massive blocks. However, for those who see an alien hand, the sheer scale, precision, and astronomical alignments of the Giza pyramids and other megalithic structures in Egypt seem to defy conventional explanations for the technological capabilities of the time. Could these be beacons, power plants, or landing markers for Anunnaki spacecraft, as some have suggested? Were the intricate hieroglyphs and temple carvings not just religious or historical records, but perhaps also technical manuals or depictions of advanced technology, misinterpreted by later generations? Think of the famous Dendrolite, a carving in the Hathor Temple at Dendera that some interpret as depicting a giant electrical lamp or cathode ray tube, complete with a filament, socket, and cable. Mainstream Egyptologists see it as a symbolic representation of a lotus flower, a jet pillar, and a snake, all common motifs in Egyptian mythology related to creation. It's a classic case of seeing what you're predisposed to see, a divine lotus or a divine light bulb. Then there's the Egyptian gods themselves. While they have different names and iconographies from the Sumerian Anunnaki, some researchers try to draw parallels. Could Ra, with his solar associations, be a memory of Anu, the Sky Father, or perhaps linked to the concept of Nibiru's fiery passage? Was Thoth, the wise scribe god, an Egyptian manifestation of Enki, the bringer of knowledge? A quirky tidbit, Thoth was said to have authored numerous books of immense wisdom, including the legendary Book of Thoth, which supposedly contained powerful spells and secrets of the universe. Owning a copy was said to be rather hazardous to one's health if misused. Kind of like an ancient Egyptian version of the Necronomicon, but probably with fewer tentacles and more hieroglyphs. The connections are often speculative, based on thematic similarities rather than direct textual links explicitly stating, I, Thoth, am actually Enki on an exchange program. Egyptologists and historians still debate the extent and nature of early cultural exchange between Mesopotamia and Egypt, with evidence suggesting some limited contact and influence, particularly in the pre-dynastic period, but with Egyptian civilization largely developing along its own unique trajectory. The foreign influences seen in early Egyptian art and architecture are generally attributed to trade and gradual cultural diffusion, not to a shared council of sky gods dictating civilizational development in both regions. Yet, the allure of a connection persists. Consider the Egyptian focus on the afterlife, mummification, and the preservation of the body. Could this be a distorted echo of Anunnaki longevity, or perhaps even attempts to replicate Anunnaki resurrection technology, as some theories propose for Osiris? The story of Osiris, dismembered and then reassembled and brought back to life by Isis and Anubis, is a powerful one. Was it purely symbolic, or did it hint at advanced medical or biological knowledge possessed by the gods who inspired these myths? Similarly, the concept of pharaohs as divine or semi-divine beings, sons of Ra, could be interpreted as a parallel to the Sumerian kings appointed by the Anunnaki, or even as descendants of Anunnaki human hybrids, carrying that divine bloodline. The land of the pharaohs, with its enigmatic sphinx staring silently across the millennia, its towering obelisks, and its treasure-filled tombs, offers fertile ground for such theories. The sheer grandeur and enduring mystery of its monuments practically invites speculation about extraordinary origins. While mainstream archaeology provides robust, evidence-based explanations for most aspects of Egyptian civilization, the narrative of ancient astronauts finds Egypt to be a particularly resonant location. It's as if the stones themselves whisper of a time when gods walked the earth, or at least, when beings of immense power and knowledge left an indelible imprint on the sand of time. Whether these were the same Anunnaki who once oversaw the rebuilding of Sumer, or a different contingent of cosmic visitors, or purely the product of indigenous human genius and spiritual belief, the ethereal echoes in Egypt add another fascinating layer to our quest for creators. Leaving the majestic pyramids and sun-drenched temples of Egypt behind, your journey now expands, becoming a sweeping overview of the ancient world. If these Anunnaki or other star gods, as they are sometimes generically termed, were indeed interstellar travelers with a penchant for guiding or exploiting fledgling civilizations, it stands to reason their influence wouldn't be limited to just Mesopotamia and Egypt. You begin to scan the globe, looking for similar patterns, similar stories, similar inexplicable artifacts, or sudden leaps in cultural development. And as you look, you find that the footprints of these alleged ancient astronauts, or at least stories that can be interpreted as such, seem to appear in the most diverse and widely separated cultures. It's like finding the same unusual brand of cosmic graffiti tagged on monuments from Peru to India. Fly across the Atlantic, far from the familiar lands of the Near East, and alight in the breathtaking Andes Mountains of South America. Here, civilizations like the Inca and their predecessors flourished. Consider the mind-boggling stone architecture of sites like Sacsayhuaman in Peru, with its massive, irregularly shaped stones, some weighing over 100 tons, fitted together so perfectly without mortar that you can't slip a credit card between them. A mainstream historical fact is that the Inca were master stonemasons, achieving these incredible feats with bronze tools, stone hammers, and immense human labor, meticulously shaping and fitting each stone. It was a slow, painstaking process, a testament to their skill, patience, and organizational power. No need for laser beams or anti-gravity, just a deep understanding of materials and a lot of hard work. Imagine the project manager. No, Diego, that 80-ton diorite block is a millimeter off. Shave it down again, and try not to scuff the Imperial Llama parking space. Yet, for ancient astronaut theorists, the precision and scale are once again highly suggestive. Could these be remnants of Anunnaki construction, or perhaps built by humans under their tutelage, using forgotten technologies? Then there are the enigmatic Nazca lines, vast geoglyphs etched into the desert floor of Peru, depicting animals, geometric shapes, and straight lines stretching for miles. Visible in their entirety only from the air, their purpose remains a subject of debate. Were they astronomical calendars, ritual pathways, water sourcing guides, or, as some propose, landing strips or messages for sky beings? The local Nazca culture, which created these lines between 500 BCE and 500 CE, certainly didn't have aircraft from which to direct or fully appreciate their creations, leading to endless speculation. Journey now to Central America, to the lands of the Maya and the Aztec. The Mayan calendar, with its incredible accuracy and complex cycles, their sophisticated mathematics, including the concept of zero, developed independently, and their impressive pyramids like those at Chichen Itza or Palenque, all speak of a highly advanced civilization. One iconic image often highlighted by ancient astronaut proponents is the sarcophagus lid of the Mayan king Pacal, the Great of Palenque. They see in its intricate carvings not a depiction of Pacal falling into the Mayan underworld, as archaeologists interpret it, but Pacal seated at the controls of some kind of spacecraft, complete with levers, pedals, and even an oxygen mask. It's a powerful visual, one that has launched 1,000 speculative spaceships. A quirky tidbit: the Maya were also obsessed with a ball game, a ritual sport played with a solid rubber ball, where the losers, or sometimes the winners, depending on the interpretation and period, could be sacrificed. Talk about high-stakes sports. Sorry, team, we lost the Mesoamerican Super Bowl. Heads will literally roll. Across the Pacific, in India, the ancient Vedic texts, such as the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, contain descriptions of flying machines called vimanas. These aren't just vague references. Some texts purportedly describe their construction, their propulsion systems, sometimes involving mercury vortex engines, a concept that sounds remarkably sci-fi, and even aerial battles fought with devastating weapons that sound eerily like modern high-tech armaments, arrows of fire, weapons that could destroy entire cities. Mainstream scholars view these as poetic allegory, imaginative storytelling, or metaphors for spiritual power. But for others, they are literal accounts of advanced technology possessed by gods or ancient heroes, technology perhaps gifted or left behind by extraterrestrial visitors. Indologists and Sanskrit scholars still debate the age and interpretation of many Vedic texts, particularly those sections describing advanced technologies, with most academic views favoring symbolic or mythological readings over literal historical accounts of ancient aircraft. Even in far-flung places like Easter Island, Rapa Nui in the Pacific, with its colossal Moai statues, questions arise. How did a small, isolated population carve, transport, and erect these massive stone figures, some weighing up to 80 tons? While experimental archaeology has demonstrated plausible methods using ropes, levers, and manpower, the sheer scale of the undertaking continues to fuel speculation about outside help or forgotten knowledge. The local legends speak of the statues walking to their platforms, perhaps a metaphorical description of the transport process, or for some, a hint of levitation technology. The pattern seems to be: find a megalithic structure that looks too difficult to build with primitive tools, or an ancient text that describes something sounding like advanced technology, or a myth about gods coming from the sky and teaching humanity, and you have a potential candidate for an ancient astronaut footprint. From the Dogon people of Mali in Africa, whose complex cosmology allegedly includes knowledge of Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye, supposedly imparted by amphibious beings called Anamo, to ancient sites in China and Europe, the list of potential visitations is extensive. The challenge is always distinguishing between genuine cultural achievements of our ancestors, who were far more ingenious and capable than we often give them credit for, mythological storytelling, and actual evidence of extraterrestrial contact. The desire to see a unified external hand guiding humanity's development is powerful, but often risks underestimating the incredible diversity and independent innovation of human cultures themselves. These global star god footprints, whether real or imagined, certainly make for a much grander, more interconnected, and frankly, more exciting tapestry of our ancient past. You journeyed from the dusty plains of Sumer to the fertile banks of the Nile, across oceans to the high Andes and the jungles of Mesoamerica, even to the remote shores of Easter Island and the ancient lands of India. Everywhere you've looked, you've found these intriguing whispers, these monumental question marks, these stories of gods who descended from the heavens to interact with humanity. The Anunnaki of Mesopotamia, Ra and Thoth in Egypt, Viracocha in the Andes, Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, the Namo of the Dogon. The names change, the cultural details shift, but a core theme often resonates. Powerful, wise beings from elsewhere, bringing knowledge, establishing order, sometimes interbreeding, and occasionally throwing a world-altering tantrum like the Great Flood. So the big question looms, larger and more insistent now. Who or what were these entities? Are we talking about actual physical extraterrestrial beings, a fleet of ancient astronauts zipping around in their Nibiruvian starships? Or are these stories elaborate metaphors, archetypal figures bubbling up from the collective human unconscious, or perhaps deified ancestors and culture heroes whose deeds became magnified over centuries of oral tradition? This is the central crossroads where history, mythology, archaeology, and speculative theory collide, often with a resounding crash. Let's consider the options. The first, and the one that fuels this entire narrative genre, is the ancient alien or ancient astronaut hypothesis. This posits that these beings were, quite literally, extraterrestrials. Advanced beings from another planet, Nibiru, or perhaps planets in the Sirius system, or Zeta Reticuli, depending on which theorist you're reading, who visited Earth in the remote past, influenced human evolution and our culture, and were remembered as gods. This theory seeks to explain technological leaps, megalithic constructions, and certain out-of-place artifacts, OP-arts, as evidence of their presence. It's an enticing idea because it offers a single, grand, unified theory for a vast array of disparate mysteries. It makes humanity part of a larger cosmic story. It also, not coincidentally, makes for fantastic television. Was this 50-ton perfectly cut stone block moved by aliens? Yes. Next segment. Then there's the gods as gods perspective, the straightforward religious or mythological interpretation. For believers within specific faith traditions, their gods are real, divine, supernatural beings, existing outside the material realm, or interacting with it in ways that defy scientific explanation. For scholars of mythology and comparative religion, these gods are powerful symbolic constructs, personifications of natural forces, sun, storm, earth, water, representations of human psychological archetypes, the wise old man, the trickster, the great mother, the hero, or social legitimizations, the divine king, the priestly intercessor. In this view, the stories are not literal history but metaphorical truths, conveying wisdom, moral lessons, or cultural identity. The Anunnaki creating humans from clay isn't a genetic engineering lab report. It's a myth exploring humanity's connection to the earth and its subservience to divine will or natural order. A mainstream historical fact is that creation myths from around the world often feature humanity being formed from natural elements like clay, dust, or even trees, reflecting a deep-seated human understanding of our terrestrial origins. A third avenue of interpretation, and one that often gets less airtime in the more sensationalized discussions, is the idea of deified ancestors or culture heroes. Powerful human leaders, wise lawgivers, brilliant innovators, or even conquerors from a distant, more advanced, but still human culture could, over generations of storytelling, become magnified in legend. Their achievements could be embellished, their wisdom seen as supernatural, their origins eventually attributed to the heavens. Imagine a charismatic chief who introduces irrigation and saves his people from famine. A few centuries later, he might be remembered as a water god who descended from the sky. This doesn't require aliens, just the natural human tendency to hero worship and mythologize the past. Remember Euhemerus, the ancient Greek philosopher who first proposed that gods were originally great kings and heroes who were eventually worshipped. He'd have a field day with some of these Anunnaki tales. There's also the intriguing possibility of lost civilizations here on Earth. Could some of these gods have been survivors or representatives of a highly advanced, but now vanished human civilization, think Atlantis, Lemuria, or some other prehistoric technological society that interacted with more primitive contemporary cultures? Their advanced knowledge and technology would have seemed godlike to those less developed. This keeps the advanced beings aspect but grounds them terrestrially, avoiding the need for interstellar travel. A quirky tidbit, the 19th century esotericist Helena Blavatsky, founder of Theosophy, wrote extensively about root races and ancient, highly advanced civilizations like those of Atlantis and Lemuria, whose wisdom was supposedly passed down through secret societies. Her ideas, while not scientific, have influenced many subsequent alternative history theories. So you have these options: literal aliens, metaphorical gods, deified humans, or representatives of a lost terrestrial civilization. Scholars still debate the psychological and sociological functions of myth, particularly concerning tales of powerful creator beings and culture bearers, with some emphasizing their role in social cohesion, others their explanatory power for natural phenomena, and yet others their reflection of deep cognitive structures. The truth is, these categories aren't always mutually exclusive. Could a real event, say contact with a slightly more advanced human culture, become layered with mythological symbolism and eventually attributed to extraterrestrial gods? Absolutely. Human storytelling is a wonderfully complex and adaptive process. The challenge lies in the evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. While the ancient astronaut theory is rich in compelling questions and fascinating coincidences, verifiable, unambiguous physical evidence of alien visitation in antiquity remains elusive, at least according to mainstream scientific and archaeological consensus. Most OP-arts have more prosaic explanations. Most megalithic constructions can be plausibly, if arduously, explained by human ingenuity and labor, and most ancient texts lend themselves more readily to symbolic or terrestrial interpretations when read within their original cultural and linguistic contexts. But plausible and prosaic don't always capture the imagination in the same way as a sky god in a flaming chariot. And so the debate rages on, a captivating tussle between scientific skepticism, mythological interpretation, and the enduring human desire to believe we are part of something vast, mysterious, and perhaps not entirely of this world. To navigate this labyrinth of gods, aliens, and archetypes, one name inevitably looms large, casting a long and decidedly controversial shadow over the entire Anunnaki narrative as it's popularly understood today: Sicarius Sitchin. You can't really delve into the modern conception of the Anunnaki as ancient astronauts from Nibiru who genetically engineered humanity to mine gold without acknowledging Sitchin's immense influence. He wasn't the first to propose ancient astronauts. Figures like Eric von Daniken had already popularized the general idea, but Sitchin brought a specific, detailed, and seemingly scholarly focus to the Sumerian texts, claiming to find within them a coherent technological story of our extraterrestrial origins. Born in Azerbaijan and raised in Palestine, Sitchin was a journalist and author who claimed a deep knowledge of ancient Hebrew, Sumerian, and other ancient Semitic languages. His central thesis, laid out in his multi-million-selling 1976 book The 12th Planet and expanded upon in numerous sequels collectively known as the Earth Chronicles, was that the Sumerian myths were not myths at all, but rather historical and scientific records. He asserted that the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, were biological extraterrestrials from a planet called Nibiru, which had an elongated 3,600-year orbit that brought it into our solar system. They came to Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago to mine gold to repair Nibiru's dwindling atmosphere. Facing a mutiny from their own working-class astronauts, the Igigi, they genetically engineered Homo sapiens by mixing their own genes with those of Homo erectus to create a slave species to do the hard labor. It's the narrative we've been tracing, and Sitchin is its primary modern architect. Sitchin's work is characterized by its confident, almost encyclopedic presentation of facts gleaned from his interpretations of Sumerian cylinder seals, cuneiform tablets, and other ancient Near Eastern texts. He connected biblical narratives like the Nephilim, the Tower of Babel, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which he attributed to a nuclear blast by warring Anunnaki factions, to his Anunnaki framework, weaving it all into a grand, sweeping saga. He presented specific Anunnaki figures like Enki and Enlil not just as gods, but as individual alien commanders with distinct personalities and roles in this cosmic drama. He identified landing sites, spaceports like Baalbek in Lebanon with its colossal stone platform, and even the specific types of aircraft they supposedly used. One of his more famous interpretations was of the Sumerian king lists, with their astonishingly long reigns for pre-Diluvian kings. He argued these reigns were measured in shars or Nibiruan years, 3,600 Earth years, making the lifespan still vast, but slightly less. Biblically, Methuselah-like. The impact of Sitchin's theories on popular culture and alternative history circles has been undeniable. He provided a seemingly cohesive, detailed, and textually-based alternative to both mainstream science and traditional religious accounts of human origins. For many, his work offered thrilling answers to age-old questions, a sense that ancient myths contained hidden technological truths. He gave the Anunnaki specific names, a home planet, a motive, and a timeline. It was a ready-made, incredibly detailed universe. A quirky tidbit, Sitchin even proposed that the Anunnaki had a specific symbol, a winged disc, which he saw repeated across Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and even Mesoamerican art, representing Nibiru or their spacecraft. Mainstream iconography usually interprets this as a solar symbol or a representation of a supreme god like Ashur or Ra. But for Sitchin, it was all part of the Nibiruan visitor package. However, Sitchin's work has faced withering criticism from mainstream academics, Sumerologists, Assyriologists, archaeologists, and linguists. The scholarly consensus is that his translations are often inaccurate, his interpretations forced, and his understanding of Mesopotamian cosmology, literature, and culture deeply flawed. A mainstream historical fact is that cuneiform is a complex script, and Sumerian is a language isolate, meaning it has no known living relatives, making translation and interpretation a highly specialized and nuanced field. Scholars who have dedicated their lives to studying these texts simply do not find evidence of spaceships, genetic engineering labs, or interplanetary gold mining operations. They argue Sitchin often took words out of context, misinterpreted iconography, and projected modern technological concepts onto ancient symbolic language. For example, the word mu or shumu, which Sitchin often translated as skychamber or rocket ship, is generally understood by Sumerologists to mean name, lineage, or year, depending on the context. That's a rather significant difference, like mistaking a grocery list for rocket schematics. Academic experts in ancient Near Eastern studies overwhelmingly reject Sitchin's theories, pointing to numerous philological errors, misreadings of iconographic evidence, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of myth in ancient Mesopotamian religion. They argue that he imposed a literal, modern, technological interpretation onto texts that were rich in metaphor, allegory, and theological meaning within their own cultural framework. His work is seen as pseudoscience or pseudo-history, more akin to science fiction based on ancient motifs than actual historical or linguistic scholarship. Critics also point out that no established astronomer acknowledges the existence of a planet like Nibiru with its proposed orbit, as its gravitational influence would be easily detectable. Despite this academic rejection, Sitchin's narrative remains incredibly popular and influential in ancient astronaut circles and beyond. His books continue to sell, his ideas are frequently cited in documentaries and online forums, and for many, he remains the definitive voice on the Anunnaki. His work tapped into a deep-seated desire for a hidden history, a more exciting and technologically advanced past than the one presented in standard textbooks. He made the ancient world feel immediate, relevant, and populated by beings not so different from us, just more advanced and from farther away. His twisting narrative, whether you see it as brilliant insight or elaborate misinterpretation, has undeniably shaped the modern conversation about our ancient creators, forcing a re-examination of old myths, even if the conclusions drawn are wildly different from those of the academic mainstream. He took the enigmatic clay tablets of Sumer and spun them into a cosmic opera that continues to resonate with millions, proving that sometimes the story you tell is more powerful than the story the experts insist is true. Though, you've encountered Zacharias Sitchin's detailed, dramatic, and highly controversial narrative of the Anunnaki. You've seen how he paints a picture of extraterrestrial genetic engineers and interplanetary gold rushes. But now it's time to gently nudge the pendulum back, to allow the voice of mainstream science and archaeology to offer its counter-explanations for the very same mysteries that fuel the ancient astronaut theories. How do conventional scholars, the ones who haven't booked their tickets to Nibiru just yet, account for the sudden rise of civilizations, the construction of massive megalithic structures, and those intriguing ancient texts that seem to hint at sky gods and lost technologies? Their answers might lack the Hollywood glamour of warring alien factions, but they are built upon decades, even centuries, of meticulous research, excavation, and peer-reviewed analysis. Let's start with the sudden appearance of civilization, like Sumer or ancient Egypt. Mainstream archaeology doesn't actually see it as sudden in the way ancient astronaut theorists often portray it. Instead, they trace a long, gradual process of development from nomadic hunter-gatherer societies to settled agricultural villages, and then over millennia to more complex chiefdoms and finally, city-states and early civilizations. This transition, often called the Neolithic Revolution, involved the slow domestication of plants and animals, the development of pottery, the refinement of stone tools, and eventually, the emergence of social hierarchies, specialized labor, and monumental architecture. A mainstream historical fact is that archaeological sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, dating back to around 9600 to 8200 BCE, show that complex ritual structures and organized labor existed long before the rise of Sumer, pushing back the timeline for civilized human activity considerably. Göbekli Tepe, with its massive carved T-shaped pillars, predates pottery, writing, and even agriculture in that region, challenging older models of societal development but still fitting within a human-driven evolutionary framework. It wasn't aliens. It was us being surprisingly innovative much earlier than we thought. What about those mind-boggling megalithic structures, the pyramids of Giza, Sacsayhuaman's perfectly fitted stones, the Moai of Easter Island? How are they built without alien anti-gravity devices or laser cutters? The answer, according to archaeologists and experimental historians, lies in human ingenuity, meticulous planning, sophisticated knowledge of materials and engineering principles, even without advanced mathematics as we know it, and crucially a massive, well-organized workforce. For the pyramids, evidence points to the use of ramps. Their exact configuration is still debated: straight, zigzagging, internal, levers, rollers, and an incredible amount of human muscle power. Quarry marks on stones match known Egyptian tools. Worker villages near the pyramids reveal a skilled, well-fed labor force, not slaves as popularly imagined, but conscripted or paid workers who took pride in their national project. It's like a massive ancient barn raising, but for a god king, and with slightly more risk of being crushed by a 50-ton granite block. Similarly, for Sacsayhuaman, experiments have shown how large stones could be moved and fitted using techniques like scribing and coping, tracing the shape of an adjacent stone onto the one being fitted, and then painstakingly chipping away the excess. It's incredibly labor-intensive, but achievable. Then there are the ancient texts that Sitchin and others interpret as records of alien encounters. How does mainstream scholarship read them? Primarily as mythology, religious literature, epic poetry, and historical chronicles viewed through the lens of ancient cosmologies and belief systems. When the Sumerians wrote of gods descending from heaven, they were likely expressing their theological understanding of divine power and its celestial origins, not recording the landing coordinates of an Iberian shuttlecraft. Their skyboats were probably poetic descriptions of celestial phenomena or symbolic representations of divine travel, not literal spacecraft. A quirky tidbit: ancient peoples were incredibly keen observers of the sky. They developed complex mythologies around celestial events, eclipses, comets, planetary conjunctions, which could easily be described in terms that sound dramatic or otherworldly to modern ears attuned to science fiction. Imagine trying to describe a comet to someone who has no concept of astrophysics. A hairy star with a long tail, a messenger of doom, sounds much more evocative than a dirty snowball on an eccentric orbit. The concept of gods in many ancient cultures was also more fluid than our modern monotheistic or scientific understandings. Gods could be personifications of nature, deified ancestors, or powerful local spirits. Their interactions with humans in myths often serve to explain natural phenomena, legitimize social structures like kingship being handed down from heaven, or explore fundamental human concerns like life, death, and morality. Linguists and philologists still debate the precise nuances of certain ancient terms and the best way to translate complex mythological concepts into modern languages without losing their original cultural context or imposing anachronistic interpretations. The key is to understand these texts within their world, not ours. What about the astronomical knowledge of ancient cultures, like the Mayan calendar or the supposed Dogon knowledge of Sirius B? Mainstream science acknowledges the sophisticated astronomical observations made by many ancient peoples, achieved through careful, long-term naked-eye observation and mathematical calculations. The Mayan calendar, while complex, is based on observable celestial cycles. The Dogon/Sirius B claim is more contentious. Many anthropologists now believe this knowledge was likely introduced to the Dogon by European visitors in the early 20th century, rather than being ancient indigenous wisdom from amphibious aliens. The original anthropological accounts that popularized the idea have been heavily scrutinized and found wanting by later researchers. In essence, the scientific and archaeological approach is to seek the most parsimonious explanation, the one that requires the fewest new or unproven assumptions, like the existence of Nibiru or interstellar alien visitation. It emphasizes human agency, cultural evolution, and the remarkable capacity of our ancestors to innovate, organize, and create meaning in their world using the tools and knowledge available to them. It doesn't deny the mysteries of the past, but it approaches them with a rigorous methodology of evidence-based inquiry. It might not be as thrilling as a cosmic soap opera, but it reveals a story of human achievement that is, in its own way, just as awe-inspiring. The gods may not have been aliens, but the humans who envisioned them and built monuments in their honor were certainly capable of reaching for the stars. Metaphorically speaking, we've journeyed far, haven't we? From the first stirrings of cosmic wonder under a canopy of brilliant, unpolluted stars, through the dusty clay tablets of Sumer, into the grand halls of Egyptian temples, and across the globe, chasing whispers of sky gods and their enigmatic legacy. We've grappled with the Anunnaki, their alleged home world Nibiru, their desperate quest for gold, and their audacious, world-altering creation of humankind. We've seen them live alongside their creations, then nearly wipe them out in a great deluge, only to painstakingly guide the rebuilding of civilization. We've considered whether these were literal aliens, metaphorical deities, deified ancestors, or echoes of a lost terrestrial civilization. We've listened to the compelling, controversial theories of Zacharias Sitchin and contrasted them with the more grounded, evidence-based explanations of mainstream science and archaeology. And through it all, one thing becomes abundantly clear. The shadow of these creators, whether real or imagined, ancient astronauts or archetypal figures, looms incredibly large over our collective human story and, perhaps more importantly, over our enduring imagination. Why do these tales of Anunnaki, the gods from the sky, continue to fascinate us so profoundly, even in our modern, scientifically advanced age? Perhaps it's because they tap into some of our deepest, most fundamental human questions. Where do we come from? Why are we here? Are we alone in the universe? These are the same questions that likely echoed in the minds of those early humans gazing up at that pristine night sky we imagined at the very beginning of our journey. The Anunnaki narrative, in its ancient astronaut guise, offers a tantalizingly complete, if highly unorthodox, set of answers. It gives us an origin story that is both epic and strangely personal, suggesting that our very DNA might contain a spark of the extraterrestrial. It's a modern myth, woven from ancient threads, that speaks to our anxieties about our place in the cosmos and our yearning for connection to something vaster than ourselves. The enduring appeal also lies in the way these stories challenge established paradigms. They question the neat, linear progression of history taught in schools. They suggest that our ancestors might have known far more and experienced far stranger things than we give them credit for. There's a certain thrill in believing that hidden truths are encoded in ancient myths, waiting for clever decoders to unlock them. It's a bit like a cosmic treasure hunt. A quirky tidbit is the sheer number of people who, after encountering these theories, start seeing Anunnaki symbols or evidence everywhere, in company logos, in architectural designs, in the way their cat stares blankly at the wall. It's a testament to the power of a compelling narrative to reshape perception. Is that a stylized eagle, or is it clearly a Nibiruan landing craft? Moreover, the Anunnaki story, particularly in its Sichanite version, provides a convenient scapegoat or explanation for some of humanity's less savory traits. If we were engineered for labor by morally ambiguous space gods, maybe our tendencies towards conflict, greed, remember the gold, or environmental destruction aren't entirely our fault. Perhaps it's just bad programming, a glitch in the divine DNA splice. This is a psychologically comforting, if not entirely empowering thought. It allows us to deflect some of the responsibility for the human condition onto our absent and possibly negligent celestial landlords. One mainstream historical fact that often gets overlooked in the excitement is the sheer resilience and adaptability of human culture. We have an incredible capacity for creating complex social structures, sophisticated technologies, and profound art and philosophy, all without any confirmed need for extraterrestrial intervention. Our own ingenuity is often the most overlooked wonder. Scholars in fields like folklore and cultural studies still debate the precise mechanisms by which ancient myths adapt and find new relevance in contemporary society, particularly how themes of powerful creators and divine intervention are reinterpreted in the context of modern scientific and technological understanding. The Anunnaki, as ancient astronauts, are a prime example of this phenomenon. Old gods dressed in new, metallic spacesuits. They represent a fusion of ancient wonder and modern anxieties, our fear of the unknown future mirrored in our reimagining of a technologically advanced past. Ultimately, whether you believe the Anunnaki were real extraterrestrial beings who tinkered with our DNA, or purely mythological figures representing the forces of nature and the human psyche, their story serves as a powerful reminder of the enduring human quest for meaning. It underscores our fascination with origins, our desire to understand our place in the grand cosmic scheme, and our unceasing curiosity about what lies beyond the visible, the known, the mundane. The Anunnaki, in whatever form you conceive of them, have left an indelible mark, not necessarily on our genes, but certainly on our collective imagination. They are the ultimate what if, a question mark etched into the foundations of our history, prompting us to look at the past with fresh eyes and to wonder if the sky above holds more secrets than we can possibly dream of. Their shadow is a long one, stretching from the dawn of civilization into the digital age, inviting us to keep searching, keep questioning, and keep telling stories about who we are and how we came to be. And as you drift now, on the edge of sleep, that enduring mystery, that vast and ancient question, hangs softly in the air around you. Anu could be compared to the Mayan god Itzamna or the Aztec god Ometeotl, both of which are considered celestial creator deities of the universe. Enlil may be related to the Mayan god Huracan or the Aztec god Tlaloc, both of which are associated with weather and storms. Enki corresponds to Quetzalcoatl, a deity worshipped by the Olmec, Maya, and Aztecs, who is associated with wind, wisdom, knowledge, creation, and sometimes the planet Venus. At La Venta, an Olmec site and one of the oldest cultures in the Americas, there is an early depiction of Quetzalcoatl holding a cube in his right hand. Interestingly, this resembles the cubes in the left hands of winged genies in Mesopotamian art. The Nephilim, the Book of Enoch, and the Anunnaki, connection or coincidence? The Book of Enoch is an ancient text excluded from most biblical canons, with the exception of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. It describes visions and apocalyptic accounts of fallen angels and giants. The text recounts the stories of Enoch, the biblical patriarch who was taken up into heaven, where he received visions of the universe, the celestial order, and the destiny of humanity. Some theories interpret these experiences as encounters with the Anunnaki, suggesting that these beings took Enoch with them. Did the Anunnaki transport Enoch on a spaceship to a distant planet, revealing to him different parts of the universe? The Book of Enoch also mentions the Watchers, celestial beings who took human wives and produced a race of giants called the Nephilim. Because of this act, the Watchers are considered fallen angels, pursued by the faithful angels loyal to God. These fallen angels shared advanced knowledge, skills, and technologies with humans. Their offspring, the Nephilim, are described as enormous and possessing extraordinary strength. This physical aspect gave them an aura of dominance over humans, much like the Anunnaki. However, the tyrants became so destructive and dangerous that their existence was deemed unbearable, necessitating their elimination to restore order. To cleanse the earth of the evil and corruption brought by the fallen angels and tyrants, God decided to send the Great Flood. As physical beings, the tyrants perished along with other corrupted humans who were not aboard Noah's Arkansas. This narrative parallels the story of the Anunnaki flood in the poem Atrahasis and other flood myths. Were the Hebrews exposed to Mesopotamian tales and incorporated them into their culture and eventually the Bible? Was there a catastrophic flood in this region that inspired the flood narratives? Could the Nephilim be the equivalent of the Anunnaki and human offspring? The Mysteries of Human DNA in 1973, Francis Crick, along with biochemist Leslie Orgel, proposed the theory of directed panspermia. They developed this idea because they were amazed by the complexity and precision of the genetic code. Given the conditions on early Earth, they concluded that life was unlikely to arise spontaneously from inorganic molecules. They noted that the genetic code is nearly universal across all living organisms, suggesting a possible common origin. This uniformity led them to consider the theory of directed panspermia, the idea that an extraterrestrial civilization sent microorganisms to Earth to sprout life. Moreover, the complexity of the genetic code may be evidence of intelligent design rather than the result of random processes. Crick and Orgel did not claim this theory to be true, but rather presented it as a hypothesis to address challenges to theories about the origin of life. Could the idea of directed panspermia be related to the Anunnaki hypothesis of extraterrestrial origins? Paleoanthropology dates the emergence of Homo sapiens to approximately 300,000 years ago, during the Pleistocene epoch. For tens of thousands of years, humans behaved similarly to great apes. But between 50,000 and 100,000 years ago, humanity experienced a major leap in mental capabilities, technology, and culture, known as the cognitive revolution or the Great Leap Forward. There is no definitive explanation for this, but it may have been driven by genetic mutations, social adaptation, or environmental factors. Proponents of the Anunnaki extraterrestrial hypothesis argue that these extraterrestrial beings facilitated the sudden evolution of humanity. According to this theory, the Anunnaki combined their DNA with human DNA, thus creating the first humans. This intervention allegedly gave humanity enhanced brain development, along with the ability to use tools and form complex societies. The Anunnaki proposal and its claim to influence human DNA lack support from current genetic science. However, some curiosity in human biology has led some researchers to wonder if there is more to our evolutionary story. Human chromosome 2 has been the subject of considerable interest in genetic research. At some point in our evolutionary history, two ancestral chromosomes fused to form chromosome 2, a feature absent in other primates. Chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans have 24 pairs of chromosomes, while humans have 23. Some theorists suggest that this chromosome fusion was a deliberate act by the Anunnaki to accelerate human evolution. On the other hand, approximately 98% of human DNA does not code for proteins, meaning its precise purpose remains unclear. Research suggests it may have regulatory or structural roles, although its full function is still under debate, fueling speculation. Some theorists suggest this DNA contains hidden traces of genetic manipulation by the Anunnaki. Perhaps these beings left marks within our DNA that, if decoded, could reveal details about our extraterrestrial origins, Anunnaki traces on Earth. In Canyonlands National Park, Utah, strange figures created by the Fremont and Anasazi people have been discovered. They are believed to represent ceremonial or spiritual guides, although their exact meaning remains unknown. Particularly striking are the anthropomorphic figures in Segu Canyon, with hollow eyes and elongated bodies. The prevailing view is that they depict visions of shamans or supernatural beings. In 1927, local archaeologists discovered these lines while exploring this area in southern Peru. According to official archaeology, they were created by the Nazca, an ancient Peruvian culture. However, proponents of ancient astronaut theories say they were created as signals to visitors from other worlds. They claim that these giant shapes and lines served as landing strips or reference points for spacecraft. Among the most mysterious figures is the one known as the astronaut. It resembles the Palpa geoglyphs, first observed in 1926. According to studies, some are attributed to the Nazca, but most were created by the Paracas and Top-era cultures. Some resemble small figures or mythical creatures, while others appear to be wearing something resembling a double-extended helmet. These figurines, discovered in the ancient city of Ur in Mesopotamia, belong to the Ubaid culture, considered a direct precursor to Sumerian civilization. They depict human figures with elongated faces, large eyes, and pointed heads. Often depicted in positions of power or seated on thrones, they likely serve a ritual or religious purpose. From an archaeological perspective, they are viewed as symbols of beings associated with early cults, while modern authors suggest a connection to the Anunnaki. In northwest Australia, the Wandjina region, the figures are prominent in Aboriginal culture. They are considered ancestral spiritual beings who descended from the heavens to create the earth. They are depicted with large heads, protruding eyes, invisible mouths, and halos around their heads. Considered to bringers of supernatural knowledge and power, the Wandjina are believed to control rain and storms. Located in the Sahara Desert, Tassili Najar contains a collection of rock art dating back nearly 10,000 years. The artwork includes stylized human figures with large heads and elongated head elements. Some theorists describe these images as possible aliens or ancient deities, although archaeologists largely agree that they represent hunting rituals. In the Valcamonica caves, human figures appear wearing what look like round helmets or headdresses, with rays emanating from their heads. Some have interpreted these figures as beings in spacesuits, but the general consensus identifies them as warriors or shamans. Vimanas are flying vehicles mentioned in ancient Indian texts. They are described as devices used by gods and celestial beings to traverse the earth and sky. According to these accounts, the Vimana was capable of performing amazing maneuvers and flying at great speeds. Modern interpretations compare it to highly advanced spacecraft or aircraft. In some stories, the Vimana is said to have been equipped with powerful weapons capable of emitting rays or producing fire. Do all these figures and prehistoric artifacts point to the ancient presence of extraterrestrials or the Anunnaki? There is no evidence to support this, and archaeology rejects such claims, but everyone is free to form their own opinions. Regardless, these numbers are impressive and worth exploring and studying. Is Nibiru Planet 9? The planet supposedly home to the Anunnaki, Nibiru, has often been dismissed as a myth. However, NASA and the scientific community have recently discussed the possibility of a ninth planet, referred to as Planet 9. Could this planet be the home of the Anunnaki? Planet 9 has been proposed to explain the strange orbits of some Kuiper Belt objects, which cannot be explained by current solar system models. These unusual orbits may be influenced by the gravity of a large, distant planet. Calculations indicate that Planet 9 has a mass about 10 times that of Earth. Its orbital period will be much longer than Earth's. While Earth completes its orbit around the Sun in 365 days, Planet 9 would take between 10,000 and 20,000 years, following a highly elliptical path. If such a planet exists, it would be at a considerable distance from the Sun, much farther than the orbit of Neptune. However, Planet 9 has yet to be directly observed. Its existence has only been inferred through calculations and anomalies in the orbits of other celestial bodies. Are the Anunnaki or spaceships mentioned in the biblical texts? Viewing biblical texts as records of extraterrestrial encounters is a recent theory that has generated much controversy. According to this interpretation, some biblical narratives describe interactions with extraterrestrial beings or spacecraft, which ancient civilizations considered gods. One remarkable example comes from the book of the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel. The vision begins when Ezekiel, at the river Kabar, encounters a series of celestial phenomena. It describes 4 living creatures, each with 4 faces: a human, a lion, a bull, an eagle, and 4 wings. In Ezekiel 1 verse 15, he says, "I looked at the living creatures, and behold, a wheel on the ground beside every creature with its 4 faces. Beside them, he notes something even more astonishing: wheels within wheels, moving in all directions without turning." Ezekiel also describes the sound of the wings of the living creatures as the roar of a great army. Above the creatures and the wheels, he mentions what looks like a platform, upon which is a luminous throne upon which sits a radiant figure. Proponents of ancient astronaut theories suggest that these descriptions are primitive interpretations of spacecraft or UFOs. In a traditional biblical context, this vision is a spiritual depiction of God's glory. The account of the abduction of Enoch, described in Genesis 5 verse 24, is another mysterious passage in the Bible. The book states Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Although it occupies only one line in the Bible, it has sparked centuries of speculation about what actually happened at this event. Enoch, a descendant of Adam through Seth, is one of the few biblical figures who never experienced death. Unlike the other patriarchs, whose deaths are explicitly mentioned, the text simply states that Enoch disappeared because God took him. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, this abduction is understood as a divine act, demonstrating Enoch's exceptional purity and devotion to God. In modern speculative interpretations, the phrase "God took him" is believed to refer to a technological civilization that interacted with humans in ancient times. The dramatic story of the prophet Elijah being taken to heaven is described in the 2nd book of Kings. Elijah was walking with his disciple Elisha when suddenly the heavens opened and a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared. The book of Kings says, "And while they were still walking and talking, behold, a chariot of fire appeared, and horses of fire separated the 2 of them. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven." TRAPPIST 1e is located 39 light-years away, orbiting an ultra-cool star and receiving energy levels similar to those on Earth. Its Earth-like size suggests a rocky composition, along with the possibility of an atmosphere and a solid surface. Kepler 452b, located 1,400 light-years away, is nicknamed Earth's older cousin. This means that evolutionary processes on Kepler 452b could have progressed further than those on Earth. The prophecy of the return of the Anunnaki. Some interpretations of the Sumerian tablets suggest that the Anunnaki may return, bringing irreversible changes to humanity. Their return could trigger a series of global events that would forever alter life on Earth. One possible outcome is the revelation of humanity's true origins. We must face the possibility that humans are not the product of natural evolution, but rather the result of genetic manipulation. This realization could trigger an existential crisis on a global scale, transforming our understanding of the universe. If they return, their intentions may include correcting humanity, especially if they believe we have not progressed as they expected. The startling possibility is that the return of the Anunnaki could mark the beginning of contact between humanity and galactic civilizations. The Anunnaki may not be the only extraterrestrial beings in the universe, but rather members of a network of advanced races. However, this is not the only prophecy about extraterrestrial intelligence visiting our planet. The Hopi Native American tribe has a rich tradition of myths and legends passed down through generations. One such story is the belief in the existence of astral beings, entities that descend from the heavens to interact with humans. Could these beings be the Anunnaki? One of the most intriguing Hopi myths is that of the Star Children, who are said to be direct descendants of these extraterrestrial beings. The star beings shared their wisdom with humans and bore children with tribal women, resulting in offspring with exceptional abilities. These children are raised within Hopi society, but are returned to heaven by the star beings at the age of 6. However, some of these children remain on Earth, growing up among the Hopi tribe and taking on important roles within the tribe. The Hopi believe that these children have a vital purpose for the future of humanity, as they are charged with restoring balance to the world. Their mission also includes preparing Earth for the arrival of a celestial being who will mark the end of humanity's current cycle and the beginning of a new era. Similarly, the Dogon people, a tribe in Mali, have a fascinating belief in beings called the Nammos, who came from the Sirius star system in a spaceship. This tribe possesses advanced astronomical knowledge of Sirius, the brightest star visible from Earth, the echoes of chisels on stone, the whispers of ancient scribes, the faint hum of imagined spacecraft. All these sounds begin to soften now, to recede into a gentle cosmic quiet. You've walked through millennia tonight, brushed against the shadows of beings who may have shaped our world, or perhaps only shaped our oldest and most profound stories about it. The Anunnaki, with their grand ambitions and their Nibiruan anxieties, their gold lust and their genetic experiments, their divine counsels and their devastating floods, have played out their epic drama on the stage of your imagination. Whether you find yourself convinced by their literal extraterrestrial existence, or see them as potent metaphors for the human condition and our relationship with the vast, often overwhelming forces of nature and destiny, their narrative has a strange power. It pulls at something deep within us, that innate curiosity about the before, about the what. As the stars begin to blur a little at the edges, not with cosmic dust, but with the gentle onset of approaching sleep, let the weight of these immense histories settle. There's no need to solve every enigma tonight, no need to definitively choose between Sitchin's translations and the pronouncements of mainstream archaeology. The beauty of these ancient tales and the modern theories they've inspired lies not just in finding answers, but in the very act of questioning, of wondering, of allowing your mind to stretch across vast eons and consider possibilities that lie far beyond the everyday. Think of the sheer audacity of our ancestors, looking up at that same star-dusted sky you envisioned, and daring to weave narratives of creators who traversed those cosmic oceans. They sought to understand their place, just as we seek to understand ours, using the language and symbols available to them. The flickering light of your screen, or perhaps the soft glow from a distant street lamp, becomes a modern campfire around which these ancient stories are still told, still debated, still felt. The questions of our origins, of whether we are alone, of whether our destiny is entirely our own making, or if we are playing out a script written by older, wiser, or perhaps just more technologically advanced hands, these questions don't fade with the dawn. They linger, inviting contemplation in quiet moments. And that's a good thing. It keeps our sense of wonder alive, that precious human trait that fuels both scientific discovery and artistic creation. It reminds us that the universe is vast, and our knowledge, for all its impressive advancements, is still just a small, illuminated island in an immeasurable ocean of the unknown. So let the figures of Enki and Enlil, of Ishtar and Marduk, of skyships and gold mines, begin to dissolve into the gentler, more abstract patterns of your drifting thoughts. Let the weight of ages lift from your shoulders. The story of the creators, in whatever form they took, is ultimately a story about creation itself, the creation of worlds, of species, of civilizations, of myths. And you, as you lie here, are part of that ongoing creation, a consciousness capable of pondering these immense themes, a tiny speck in the cosmos, yet a universe of thought and feeling unto yourself. The soft background hum of your fan, or the quiet stillness of your room, becomes the sound of the universe breathing, a slow, steady rhythm that has pulsed through all of time, through all the ages of gods and men. The journey was long tonight, but now it's time for rest, for the quiet mending that sleep brings. The mysteries will still be there tomorrow, waiting patiently, as they have for millennia. Sweet dreams. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye, and see you again in the next stories.